The grenade was already leaving his hand. Private First Class Clarence Craft had exactly 3 rounds left in his M1 Garand, 2 Japanese grenades tucked against his chest, and he was running, alone, directly into the mouth of a fortified Japanese machine gun bunker on the crest of Hen Hill, Okinawa, May 31st, 1945. Behind him, his entire platoon was pinned down. Some were dead. The ones still breathing were pressed so flat against the Okinawan clay, they looked like they were trying to become part of it. No orders were coming. The radio was silent. The plan had shattered 40 minutes ago. In front of him, a Japanese position that had already killed or wounded 83 American soldiers across 4 separate assault attempts. 42 enemy soldiers reinforced overnight. 3 Type 92 heavy machine guns, and their overlapping fields of fire covering every natural approach to the summit. 30-meter concrete reinforced bunkers carved into volcanic rock and supplied with enough ammunition and food to outlast a 2-week siege. The man commanding that position, Sergeant Major Kenji Watanabe, 15 years in the Imperial Army, veteran of Manchuria and the Philippines, had personally overseen the defense of this ridgeline for 6 weeks and had never once considered the possibility it could fall. 42 against 1. Kraft didn't know about the ambush waiting for him on the left flank. He didn't know that the intelligence briefing that had sent his unit up this slope had underestimated Japanese strength by a factor of 3. He didn't know that 3 minutes ago, a radio order he had never received had caused his platoon sergeant to pull the surviving men back, leaving him out here alone, not by choice, but by the brutal arithmetic of a battlefield that had simply forgotten him. He knew one thing: the position had to be taken. What he did in the next 40 minutes, alone on that volcanic hillside, would leave the soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army's 32nd Division with a question they were still unable to answer when American interrogators sat across from them in a prisoner of war facility weeks later. The interrogator's question was simple: how many Americans attacked your position? The Japanese soldier stared at the floor of the interrogation room for a long time. 1, he finally said. Just 1. Clarence B. Craft was born in San Bernardino, California, in 1921, and grew up during the worst years of the Great Depression, in a house where luxury meant 3 meals on the same day. His father worked the railroads. His mother raised 4 children in a 2-bedroom house on a street where the paint was always peeling, and the rent was always almost due. He was not a large man, 5 feet 10, 160 pounds soaking wet. The kind of build that people politely described as wiry, and impolitely described as too skinny for what you're trying to do. When he enlisted in January 1944 at 23 years old, the Army recruiter asked him twice if he was sure he wanted infantry. Kraft said yes both times, the second time without blinking. His fellow soldiers in Company E, 382nd Infantry Regiment, 96th Infantry Division, the Deadeyes, would describe him in ways that seemed contradictory until you understood him. Quiet, almost invisible in a crowd. Never the loudest voice at chow. Never the guy telling the best stories. The kind of man who could sit in a full barracks and somehow not be noticed until someone went looking for him. But on the rifle range, something changed. He shot like he was born with that Garand in his hands. said Corporal James Reinhold, who trained alongside Kraft at Camp Adair, Oregon. You'd have to see it to understand. Every shot exactly where he said it was going. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Like the gun was just an extension of him deciding something. The Deadeyes called him the accountant because every shot he fired felt like a calculation completed before the trigger moved. A man who didn't waste, who counted everything. In his breast pocket, folded against his sternum, he carried a single photograph. Not a sweetheart. His younger sister Dorothy, standing in front of the San Bernardino house on what appeared to be Christmas morning, squinting into the winter sun with the expression of someone who's been told to smile and has forgotten exactly how. On the back, in his own handwriting, 2 lines. I'm coming home. Don't let anyone take my room. He had written it the night before he shipped out. He'd never sent it. He kept it instead. That photograph, pressed against his heart through every firefight from Leyte to Okinawa, through every night on a Pacific island that smelled of sulfur and wet earth and things he would never describe in letters home. That photograph was still in his pocket on May 31st, 1945, when everything his unit had planned ceased to exist. This video gives you the story. But the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details. Forgotten heroes, free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. Now back in the video. To understand what Clarence Kraft walked into on Hen Hill, you have to understand what the Japanese had built there, and why the United States Army's own intelligence officers had failed, catastrophically, to understand it until it was too late. This begins with the Navy. The United States Navy's amphibious assault doctrine, built through the blood of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima, had become by 1945 the most lethal amphibious warfare machine in human history. 1,300 ships and carrier aircraft neutralizing Japanese air power before a single boot touched sand. Naval gunfire that could reduce a beachfront position to rubble with 20 minutes of preparation. It was a tactic so overwhelming that Japan's military high command repeatedly refused to believe the Americans could sustain it at the scale they were executing it. They were wrong. Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, launched April 1st, 1945, with 182,000 assault troops, the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific War. But Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding the Japanese 32nd Army, was not a man who argued with reality. He had studied American amphibious tactics with the cold attention of a man preparing for a guest he intended to destroy. He understood what many Japanese commanders had not. Fighting Americans on the beaches against naval gunfire and carrier air was suicide. The beaches were where American power was supreme. So Ushijima did not defend the beaches. He pulled his 110,000 men into the ridgelines of southern Okinawa and built the Shuri Line, a defensive network of bunkers, tunnels, and artillery positions so deeply excavated into volcanic rock that naval gunfire could not reach the men inside. Positions that required infantry, American boots, American bodies to dislodge. He had rendered the Navy's greatest weapon tactically irrelevant and invited the Americans to come die on ground he had chosen. Hen Hill was one node in this network. By May 1945, it had repelled 4 separate American assault attempts at a cost of 83 American casualties. Sergeant Major Watanabe had built a defense that the 96th Infantry Division's planners assessed as requiring coordinated regimental effort to reduce by conventional means. His 3 Type 92 heavy machine guns covered every natural approach. His men had been in position for 6 weeks and knew every rock, every inch of ground an attacker would have to cross. When Company E received orders the morning of May 31st, the intelligence estimate put Japanese strength on Hen Hill at 12 to 15 men. It was not 12 to 15 men. The assault plan was straightforward. 2 squads providing suppressing fire from the eastern approach, Kraft's squad advancing along the northern slope under cover. 10 minutes of artillery preparation, then advance. Reach the crest, eliminate the position, hold for follow-on forces. At 0600, the artillery preparation began. At 0614, Company E's lead elements rounded the northern slope and ran directly into a prepared killing ground that intelligence had not mapped, had not identified, had not even speculated about. A secondary bunker complex, reinforced with fresh troops, moved in overnight, not 12 defenders, but 42, with fields of fire covering exactly the approach American intelligence had designated as the safe route. The plan didn't bend. It shattered. Private First Class Leonard Howell went down in the first 15 seconds. Sergeant Marcus Webb followed. Then Private Delaney, who had been in Kraft's fire team for 8 months, and who owed Kraft $3 from a card game they would now never finish. The northern slope became a geography of sound. The flat crack of Type 99 machine guns, in the scream of men who had been told the route was clear, the terrible silence of the ones who went down and made no sound at all. At 0623, the radio crackled. Company Command, pulling back from a position 1 ridge over, issued a redirect. All elements of Company E were to consolidate on the eastern assembly point. Fall back, regroup, new orders pending. Kraft's platoon sergeant heard the order. Most of the surviving members of the platoon heard it. Kraft was already 40 meters up the northern slope, pressed against a volcanic rock outcropping. The radio operator, who might have relayed the order to him, was behind the rock he'd just passed, and he wasn't moving anymore. The platoon pulled back. Clarence Kraft did not receive the order. He was alone on the slope. 3 magazines for his M1 Garand, 24 rounds. His M1911 pistol, 4 fragmentation grenades, a broken plan, and a position that had to be taken. He pressed the photograph flat against his chest through the fabric of his jacket. Then he looked up the slope. He began to move, not recklessly, not with the noise of desperation, with the flat, methodical economy of a man trained to do precisely this, to cross open ground under fire, and who was doing it now with the same detached precision that had earned him the name the Accountant back at Camp Adair. Up the slope. 15 meters. Rock, stop, breathe, assess, move. Sergeant Major Watanabe, in his command position at the crest of Hen Hill, had watched the American assault collapse with the quiet satisfaction of a professional who had designed exactly this outcome. He had listened to the sudden relative silence after the machine guns had done their work. It had noted the withdrawal in the brisk efficiency of a man updating a casualty log he expected to make him famous. Then one of his forward observers reported something that did not fit any pattern in any briefing Watanabe had ever attended. One man, still moving up. Watanabe raised his field glasses. The slope below showed the wreckage of the failed American assault, the stillness, the abandoned positions, and one moving figure working the terrain with a patience and economy of motion that Watanabe had not seen since he'd fought against Chinese regular army units in Manchuria a decade ago. He gave the order to redirect the Type 92 to the northern slope. What happened in the next 12 seconds nearly ended the story. A spider hole dug into a crevice on the left flank of the slope, absent from every American intelligence map, opened fire. The round struck close enough that dirt from the impact stung Kraft's left cheek. He dropped and rolled, and his body hit a slight depression in the volcanic soil, perhaps 12 inches deep, that brought him below the firing line of the secondary position. The ambush was textbook, both positions covering the same point simultaneously. One man in a 12-inch depression should not have survived that. Kraft counted to 3. He pulled a fragmentation grenade, let the spoon fly. 1 count, 2, and threw it not toward the spider hole, but past it, angling the throw to bounce off the volcanic rock face behind the position. The grenade detonated behind and above. The 2 Japanese soldiers inside instinctively ducked forward and down. Kraft was already moving, diagonal, fast, into the dead ground between both positions, the one angle where neither had a clean shot. 8 meters in 4 seconds. He pressed against the slope, back flat against stone. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the wet volcanic earth until they stilled. Then he did something that made no tactical sense, until you understand what he had already seen, that no one else on that battlefield could see. He had seen the drainage pattern. Okinawa's volcanic soil doesn't drain evenly. The centuries of rain carve subtle channels through the rock, barely visible as depressions, not visible at all as tactical routes. No military planner routes an advance through drainage channels. They're too shallow, too irregular, too easy to overlook on a map. No military planner. Kraft moved through the drainage channel on his elbows and knees, our M1 Garand cradled in his arms, for 90 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. Above him, Type 99 fire swept the open slope. The obvious approaches, the ones 4 previous assaults had used. The approaches that had cost 83 men. The drainage channel was not obvious. He came up 15 meters from the first bunker's firing aperture. In the next 30 minutes, he moved through the position in actions that each cost him something real. First obstacle, the Type 92 in the primary bunker, covering the eastern approach. He came at it from the left, the narrow angle where the aperture's field of fire was weakest, and put 2 grenades through the opening in sequence. He didn't wait to check the result. He was already moving to the secondary position. Cost his last 2 fragmentation grenades. He had the M1911 now, and 8 rounds left in the Garand. Second obstacle, 3 rifle positions in a connecting trench, 25 meters of open ground between him and the next approach. He sprinted it during a moment of coordination failure, the moment Watanabe's men were redirecting attention toward the now silenced eastern aperture, and the rifle positions were watching the wrong quadrant. Cost: a shrapnel graze across his right forearm from a Japanese grenade that detonated 2 meters short. Not deep enough to stop him, deep enough to bleed steadily for the remainder of the action. Third obstacle, he stopped. They were in a bunker entrance 8 meters to his left, partially concealed by corrugated tin that had been placed there with no tactical purpose. Civilian debris repurposed for shade by soldiers who expected to hold this position indefinitely. 2 women and a young boy. Okinawan civilians. The older woman, perhaps 60, perhaps older, the war had aged everyone, was holding the boy's face against her chest, keeping him silent. The younger woman, perhaps 18, was frozen against the concrete wall of the entrance, eyes so wide and so fixed on Kraft that she seemed to have forgotten to breathe. They had been in that bunker entrance through everything. Through the 4 previous American assaults that had killed 83 men outside. Through 6 weeks of Japanese occupation that had pressed Okinawan civilians into labor and abandoned them when the fighting intensified. The boy was perhaps 6 years old. He was clutching a ceramic bowl with both hands. A plain ceramic bowl, pale blue. Kraft never learned why. It was simply what the boy had brought when everything fell apart. Kraft held up his hand, open palm, the universal signal for stay, and held it for 3 full seconds. The older woman nodded. Once, barely perceptible. Kraft changed his route. The direct approach to Watanabe's command position ran through the central connecting trench, 10 meters wide, fully exposed. That was now impossible. It would bring the fighting within grenade range of the civilians. He had to go around. 40 additional meters. Exposed terrain. No natural cover. 2 remaining active Japanese positions, with clear sight lines to the route he would have to take. The detour cost him 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, Sergeant Major Watanabe was trying to understand what was happening to his fortified, reinforced, impregnable position. And he could not. His forward observer had watched the full northern slope, had counted the Americans pulling back, had then reported 1 man still advancing, had then lost contact with the Spider Hole crew, had then lost contact with the primary bunker, had then watched the connecting trench positions redirecting fire toward an angle the attacker should not have been able to reach. Watanabe pressed the handset to his ear. "How many Americans are attacking?" Silence on the other end. Then, 1. I believe 1. Watanabe stared at the handset. He had been a soldier for 15 years. He had defended positions against Chinese regulars, against British-trained colonial units, against American Marines at the Philippines. He had never, in 15 years of professional military service, had been required to answer the question that his own mind was now forming. What do you do when your training has no category for what you are facing? He gave the order to pull the remaining 11 able-bodied men into a defensive ring at the command position. He gave the order. He did not entirely believe it would work. At the perimeter's left flank, a private named Hiroshi Tanaka, 18 years old, 14 months in the Imperial Army, held his assigned position for 4 minutes after the consolidation order. Then he heard something from the direction of the connecting trench. Not artillery, not a coordinated assault. Something he later described in a prisoner of war compound on Saipan as the sound of 1 man walking toward us, like he had already decided. Tanaka moved back from his position without orders. Watanabe noticed. He shouted. The words came out less like commands than like something between commands and questions. Kraft found cover behind a collapsed section of trench wall and stopped. No food since the previous evening. No water since before 0600. The wound on his forearm had soaked through the field dressing he'd managed to wrap one-handed during a 30-second pause behind a rock. The Garand had 5 rounds remaining. The M1911 held 6. The command position was 30 meters upslope. He put his back against the trench wall and pressed both hands flat against the volcanic stone, and for one specific moment, a moment he never described to anyone, but that can be read in the spaces between the words in his after-action interview. He was not on a hillside above the East China Sea. He was in San Bernardino. Dorothy was squinting into the winter sun. The house needed painting. It was Christmas morning, and somewhere, impossibly, there was the smell of coffee. He pressed his right hand flat against his breast pocket. Through the jacket, through the dried sweat, through the blood that had worked down his arm and across his chest, the photograph was there, stiff, real. I'm coming home. Don't let anyone take my room. He thought about the ceramic bowl the boy was holding. He thought about Marcus Webb going down in the first 15 seconds. He thought about the radio order he had never received, about what it would mean to pull back now, having already done what he had done. Whether retreating from 30 meters would mean those 83 men on the previous assaults had died for a position that would be reinforced tonight and cost another 83 men tomorrow. He was talking to Marcus Webb, very quietly. Not words that made sense as a transcript, just the sound of a man's voice, low and steady, in conversation with someone who wasn't there. His hands had begun shaking again. He pressed them flat against the rock until they stilled. The boy with the ceramic bowl was somewhere below him, in the bunker entrance with the corrugated tin. The older woman was keeping him quiet. That was his responsibility now. Not just the objective, not just the orders that had never reached him. That, too. The photograph was in his pocket. He got up. He moved. Not with the patience of the drainage channel. Something had shifted in the calculation above him, and he felt it. The way a former rifle range champion can feel when the geometry of a situation has changed, when the targets are no longer where they were assigned to be. Watanabe's remaining 11 men were tightening their ring, pulling inward. The decision was tactically correct by the manual. It was also the decision of a man who had stopped believing he understood the shape of what was coming. 2 soldiers assigned to the left flank of the perimeter, the position abandoned by Tanaka, had left a gap. Not a large gap. Enough. Kraft came up the final 10 meters through the dead ground of that gap. He had the M1911 in his left hand and the Garand in his right, and the math of the next 90 seconds was brutal and clean. 5 rounds from the Garand, 6 from the M1911. 1 decision per round. He moved, fired, dropped, moved again. 30 meters, 20, 10. The irrational decision from 40 minutes ago, the drainage channel, the 40-meter detour around the civilians, resolved itself in the final approach. The route had brought him to the command position from the one angle that Watanabe had not covered, because any sane military calculation would have designated it impassable. The drainage channel approach made the impassable angle the only angle Kraft was coming from. Watanabe had stationed no one there because no one could be there. No one trained by a manual could be there. Corporal Makoto Shida, 7 years in the Imperial Army, survivor of Guadalcanal and the Philippine Campaign, had his rifle up. His finger was on the trigger. He had been in this position, in this posture, under these conditions more times than he could count, and his hands were wrong. He said this to his interrogator later, in the precise, honest way of a professional soldier who doesn't soften his own failures. My hands were wrong. When one man does what a unit is supposed to do, when the mathematics of combat breaks, a soldier's body doesn't know what to do. I've been a soldier 7 years. My hands have never been wrong before. Kraft disarmed him. The civilians were clear. The old woman was watching from the bunker entrance below. The boy had stopped gripping the ceramic bowl like a lifeline. He was just holding it. The way you hold something ordinary. The command position fell at 07:14. One sentence of silence on Hen Hill. Kraft sat down against the bunker wall. His hands had stopped shaking. He pressed the photograph flat against his chest, through his jacket, and listened to the silence where a battle used to be. When elements of Company E, 382nd Infantry Regiment, reached the crest of Hen Hill at 0800, 46 minutes after Kraft had taken the command position alone, they found the following. One private first class, seated against a bunker wall, weapon across his knees, right forearm wrapped in what appeared to be his own bootlace. 34 documented enemy casualties across the position. 2 enemy soldiers taken prisoner. 3 disabled Type 92 heavy machine gun emplacements. A command bunker that 3 separate Japanese defense assessments had rated as near impregnable, which had repelled 4 prior American assault attempts at a cost of 83 American casualties. 3 Okinawan civilians, alive. At First Lieutenant Harold Graves, commanding what remained of Company E, stood at the top of Hen Hill and looked at what one man had done and didn't speak for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said, "Kraft, what in the hell?" It was not a question. The 2 Japanese prisoners, Corporal Makoto Shida and Private Yamamoto, were processed at the 96th Infantry Division's prisoner handling facility over the following days. Their interrogations, conducted through a Nisei interpreter, produced testimony that American intelligence officers flagged as unusual enough to include verbatim in after-action documentation. The interrogator asked Shida directly how many Americans had attacked the command position. 1, Shida said. How many attacked the full position across the morning? Shida was quiet. 1. One man. Just the others came later. Was he certain? Shida looked at his hands. My hands were wrong. When one man does what a unit is supposed to do, when the mathematics of combat breaks, a soldier's body doesn't know how to respond. I've been a soldier 7 years. My hands have never been wrong before. One man should not be able to do that to a position like ours. My hands did not know how to answer what was happening. Private Yamamoto, interviewed separately, was asked if he had been afraid during the assault. He did not answer directly. Instead, he described the sound of Kraft moving through the position. Methodical, patient, relentless. Without the noise of a coordinated assault, without the suppressing fire pattern that Japanese defensive training had been built to respond to. He described the confusion among the defenders. The radio messages that contradicted each other, the positions that stopped responding without explanation, the growing certainty that whatever was attacking them was not following any pattern they recognized. "We called him Oni no Kage," Yamamoto said. The interpreter translated, "the shadow of the demon." Not the demon itself, the shadow. The thing that moves across you before you understand what cast it. The name, Yamamoto explained, came from a specific moment. The minute when Kraft crossed the connecting trench at a sprint during the coordination failure, and two separate Japanese positions, both tracking his movement, both fired at a range of less than 20 meters, and both missed. In Imperial Army tradition, to miss a man twice at that range meant one of two things. The shooter had failed, or the man could not be killed. And the soldiers who survived that crossing chose the second explanation. They gave him the name after that moment. The Okinawan woman, interviewed by Army Civil Affairs the following week, was asked what she had seen from the bunker entrance. She said, through a translator who noted the phrasing carefully, that she had watched a man come up the hill alone, that he had stopped when he saw them, and changed the way he was moving so as not to bring the fighting near them, and that she had known before anyone told her that he was the reason they were still alive. She had no name for him. She called him the soldier who looked at my grandson. When asked what that meant, she said, "He stopped in the middle of everything. He stopped, and he looked at my grandson like he was going to remember him." Private First Class Clarence B. Kraft was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman on October 5, 1945. The official citation reads, in part, Private First Class Kraft, when his platoon was pinned down by a strongly defended enemy ridge position, left his covered position and charged the ridge alone. Although the enemy directed their full firepower against him, he successfully reached the top and began throwing grenades into the enemy positions. He killed or wounded numerous enemy soldiers. His extraordinary heroism and his magnificent fighting spirit in the face of overwhelming odds reflect the highest credit upon himself and are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Army. Official military language is economical with awe. Read those words carefully. Overwhelming odds, extraordinary heroism, magnificent fighting spirit. And these are not phrases applied to routine actions. These are phrases that appear when the record requires honest language about something that should not have been possible and was. Kraft returned to San Bernardino, California. He did not speak frequently about Hen Hill. When the Medal of Honor citation became public and reporters came to find him, he answered questions briefly, accurately, and added nothing not asked. His sister Dorothy, standing beside him at the ceremony, noticed that he put his hand flat against his breast pocket once during the reading, a gesture so small and so automatic she thought she might have imagined it. She had not imagined it. The 10th Army's review of the Okinawa campaign noted that the reduction of the Shuri line, position by position, ridge by ridge, through individual actions like Kraft's at Hen Hill, broke organized Japanese resistance on the island. Okinawa fell on June 22, 1945. Okinawa was designated the staging ground for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. American planners projected American casualties for that invasion at between 250,000 and 800,000 men. That invasion never happened. The number of lives saved by the fall of Okinawa, by the breaking of the Shuri Line, hill by hill, by men like Clarence Craft, who climbed slopes that should not have been survivable, is not calculable with any precision. It is simply very large. He was given wrong intelligence. The route that was supposed to be safe was covered by 42 enemy soldiers in a position that had already killed 83 men before him, and the plan he had trained for evaporated in the first 15 seconds of contact with the slope. His orders changed when he needed them most, and he never even received the change. So deep into the slope, he was already committed. He faced an ambush precisely designed to kill him, at a range where missing should have been geometrically impossible. And he survived it because he threw a grenade at an angle that required him to know the geometry of a rock face he had never seen until that moment. And his instincts were right. He protected 3 civilians, an old woman, a young woman, and a small boy with a ceramic bowl, at a cost of 4 minutes and 40 meters of exposed ground, and a route change that made everything harder and more dangerous. And the men who tried everything they had to stop him, professional soldiers, battle-hardened, are in a position that had been rated impregnable by their own high command, gave him a name when it was over. Oni no Kage, the shadow of the demon. They gave him that name not because they were weak men who had encountered a strong one. They gave him that name because they were professional soldiers who had encountered something their doctrine had not prepared them for. And they needed a word for what they had no other word for. To the veterans watching this, you know what it costs to climb a slope when the plan has already collapsed and the unit has already pulled back. You know what it means to carry dead men in your memory while navigating the terrain that made them dead. You know the weight of the photograph against your chest, whatever form your photograph took. You don't need me to explain it. And to everyone else, Clarence Craft was not born extraordinary. He was a Depression-era kid from San Bernardino who could shoot very straight, and who, on one May morning on a volcanic hillside, found himself alone between an enemy position and 3 civilians and a mission that was still active, and he made his decision. Not because anyone was watching, not because the citation was already being written somewhere, because the objective was still there, because the boy was still holding the ceramic bowl, because the photograph was in his pocket, and there was a room in a house in California with his name on it, and he had made a promise. He kept it. He came home. He never let anyone take his room. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments.